Hi, welcome to the Christian Indie Writers Podcast, where we inform, encourage, and support Christian indie writers on their journey toward publication. I'm Christina Catane, and I write in multiple genres, including Christian dystopian fiction.
I'm Jamie Hirschberger, and I write short fiction under the pen name J.R. Nichols.
I'm Rhonda Hagerman, and I write fiction and nonfiction.
Okay, so before we go any further today, I just want to point out that, oh my gosh. I forgot that I had my.
I hear a voice from the past.
That was my phone, because I have my phone on so I could follow the chat, except I just realized I have the chat in front of me.
Okay,
but anyway.
well, we're kind of derailed anyway. I just think it's kind of funny how Rhonda and I never discuss who's going to say their name. And so there's always this weird moment of like, oh no, are we going to start talking at the same time? So next time, Rhonda, we have to pre-plan that.
Let's pre-plan now. I will always go last.
All right, that sounds good to me. Anyway,
I always call it Jennifer. That's all I know.
Yeah.
So speaking of Jennifer, she's not here today. Sadly, her aunt passed away. We got word of it. We were just getting ready to go live last week when we got the news. So our prayers are with Jennifer and her family and their grief. There's never words, right? There's never words to say that to somebody who's gone through something like that and they're grieving and you just don't know what to say.
I know words can only do so much. Isn't that true? And you have feelings and emotions and the words just feel so insufficient.
Yeah. I was going to say something flowery and poetic, but then it just seems trite, that's not even going to touch what they're feeling. So you might as well just keep your mouth shut. But our thoughts are definitely with Jen, and we miss her and we love her. And we pray that God will comfort her in this time. So that's Jen's what's up. And we would ask that all our listeners pray for her as well. And then Rhonda, why don't you go next and tell us what's up with you?
Well, I don't really have a whole lot to report. I've been spending some time decluttering and things like that. I have not written in 3 weeks since the day I got off the plane from Croatia. And anyway, so I really don't have a lot going on with me right now.
But what are you doing with your hair? Because it looks really great. It looks like
thank you.
And voluminous. And
that is the post-workout look. It is sweat and grease.
Ooh, sweat and grease.
Yes, it's like a pomade.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's probably why they used to use it, right? You ever listen to those old radio commercials for luxurious hair? Use blah, blah, blah. Luster cream. That's the one that I always hear about.
Yeah, roll cream. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
My hair also looks better when it's dirty, too. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, Jamie, what are you doing?
I don't even know. I even laid in bed last night thinking about what am I going to say for my what's up? I mean, really, it just is a whole lot of going through the motions. There's a routine now with school back in session. Even though I homeschool, there's still a rhythm and a routine, and we just kind of have been following it and chugging along. We'll talk about the writing stuff in a future part of the podcast, but frankly, it's just been rather uneventful. And so, I mean, quiet over here, peaceful waters. What about you, Bambina?
Yeah, it's just been kind of going through the routine of life here, getting up and doing office hours and then working on my regular job and trying to avoid housework as much as possible without, there actually being infestations or whatever.
Do you want to know what's interesting, though, is there's been not still waters for people who are in my circle. And I sometimes feel like when your life is kind of going just hummity-drummity, it's because you're able then to be there for people who need to reach out and be supported and feel encouraged and all of that stuff. And so maybe we're just getting a bit of a rest of eventful stuff so that we can have our energy for praying for people and supporting them when they call us up. So anyone in my circle that needs to call me up, I'm here and I'm in a good place to be a support. So reach out.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's not that I'm not busy or anything, but it's just kind of, it's just the stuff of life,
Right. Like no emotionally taxing.
Right. And it's not anything I would jump and call my mother and say, oh, guess what? So.
Yeah. All right. Well,
so Just cooking anything. Okay, so we decided in the spirit of Preptober that we were going to go back to basics with our podcast topics this month. So for those that don't know, November is National Novel Writers Month. Short for that is NaNoWriMo. And that's where they challenge you to write 50,000 words in a month.
Which is a very short novel. That's
Very
why
short.
I call that, yeah.
Right. And so in order to be able to sit down and write 50,000 words in November, a lot of people like to prep first and have an outline or however they prep for their writing. I'm not sure pantsers prep.
Well,
Maybe they think about their ideas and characters a little bit, but
right.
I know the first time I did NaNoWriMo, I found out about it like October 31st. And I sat down and did it starting on November 1st. So
I think pantsers either prep or panic, but either way, they feed off of that fuel, right? Like the feeling of panic, the feeling of deadline, and it propels them. I'm speaking as a pantser myself, and I guess I'm just being a little bit introspective as I say that, because I feel like last year, even though we spent the whole month of October prepping, I still kind of felt like, oh, what? It's November 1st. I have to write a story. And I had only really kind of thought about what I was going to do. And it was so funny because I remember Jen saying, like, so of course you've been thinking about what you're going to write all year. And I'm sitting there going, I have? Because I totally hadn't been. But the panic of it can be its own fuel.
So, Jamie, what did you actually do? Because you are a dyed-in-the-wool pantser. So
yeah, Rhonda, I really even just don't remember. All I remember was the burden I felt to get that nano project off my to-do list. And so I wrote like a crazy person, but I had a whiff of an idea, I think. And then it just kind of grew from there.
Okay. So you really didn't have any prep though.
I did because of our podcast. So
Okay.
all during October, I kind of started to get a little bit more serious about, oh my goodness, this deadline is coming and I'm going to have to write. Ugh.
Yeah, and I think mostly we were focused on the story I was going to write because we were prepping that whole thing. And I remember that you were done like halfway through the month.
Yeah, because I just...
craziness.
That's a topic for another time, but that deadline feeling, I don't like it. But if you guys go back, anyone who's listening who would like to see what we did for Preptober last year, I just happened to share with some people on Facebook. It starts at episode 9. So if you go back through our podcast archives and you find episode 9, that's the first nano prep episode. And then if you just kind of scroll around and look for the other ones in that same area, they're all going to be nano episodes.
Awesome. Okay, so we decided to go back to basics and talk about the elements of story.
Yeah, and we may have brushed on this in a previous episode, but I'm thinking we're given some really good fresh material here. So
right. So what are the elements of story? Who wants to address that?
Sounds like a quest. We are on a quest to obtain the elements of story.
Well, okay, so I'll do this. So the basic of the basics are you need a protagonist, an antagonist, a setting, a story arc, and a character arc.
Right.
So,
and those are kind of the ones we came up with. If you Google elements of a story, you will find everything from somebody that has 5 of them to someone that has 12, and they're all kind of different. Once you get down to the end, they all will have a protagonist, antagonist, and setting. But then when it gets a little murkier when you get down, and I feel like story arc and character arc kind of covers all the other extra ones that I saw in like when I was searching through it.
I would agree.
The
basic, when we first talked about this, I'm like, oh, beginning, middle, and end. But we're not really talking about that, are we? We're talking about, I guess, elements of a well-told story, maybe, or why a novel needs to be 50,000 words, right? I mean, you can tell a story. Once upon a time, there was a little girl with a red hood, and they called her whatever, but you still have all of those elements there. If you,
right. And I think I would differentiate it between elements and the structure.
Oh.
So we have these elements, and then when we talk about structure now on our next podcast, because we had too much to cover in one podcast, and that's why we did part 1 and part 2. Next time we're going to talk about the structure, and then we're going to put these elements into our structure.
When I was just on the cruise I just took, I was listening to my brother-in-law because he is one of the best storytellers that I've ever heard in my life. He is so entertaining. And when he would tell a story, I would sit there and I would try to dissect it. And it's true. He always had those, maybe the arc wasn't really full-fleshed or whatever, but it was still there.
Wow.
And it's just amazing that he does it naturally.
Wow. I'm going to be paying more attention now because, my dad has stories that he likes to tell, and I'm going to sit there and see if I can't find these elements as I'm listening. That's fun.
I would like a report on that, please.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, there's somebody wrote a book called Wired for Story. That's basically the premise of their book. That we're all kind of internally wired to crave story. And to turn things into story. So
okay, I know it's kind of derailing us, and we have a lot of material to cover anyway. But I have learned that storytelling, the art form of storytelling, like where you get up in front of people and do a storytelling presentation, right, is really craved by the younger generation, and that the audiences for that particular art form are all young people because they are so hungry for that. That they go and they're looking for the human telling the story and not just reading it in a book. And I wonder if it's because they can't really find it in the literature that they're picking up or the books that they're picking up, or they're not picking up books. Maybe they're only getting twits and tweets and grams and whatever. So they're not really getting any story. You understand? And so anyway, I just thought that was really interesting. Like The Moth in Detroit was the one that I had been reading about when I found that out.
I wonder if that's related to the fact that audiobooks are the fastest growing segment of the book market right now.
People want to be told a story, don't they? Okay, sorry. We can go back to our topic now.
No, that's so. Let's define our terms.
Okay.
So let's pretend that we have a bunch of newbies out there who have no idea what a protagonist even is.
I know, right?
What does that mean?
When we talk about the elements of story being like mystical, charms that we have to collect throughout the universe, these even are weird words that go right along with that. Like protagonist, it sounds like Latin or Greek or some kind of a weird word, doesn't it? I mean, you could call it the hero, couldn't you?
You
like
could.
If that's an easier word for people to kind of.
Or main character.
Main character, yeah.
Yep.
So the protagonist is the good guy, right?
It doesn't have to be.
Ooh. He's just what then? Like if he's not necessarily the good guy, what's the definition of him then?
Basically, the story is told from his viewpoint.
Got it. So he is the hero, even if he's not a good guy.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I believe that's called an anti-hero. So that would be another vocabulary term for people that don't know the vocab.
Okay, so if we're just talking basical whatever, we're saying main character.
Right.
Okay.
And you can have more than one main character too.
Yeah, especially in romance, right?
Yep.
Or like the Hardy Boys.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
There were
Good
two.
one.
Yeah. I don't know why I thought of that. Okay, so what about the antagonist?
Well, there's a clue because they're the same word with a different beginning. Me, the homeschool teacher, chiming in.
Yeah, right.
So if
Crow and Auntie.
Crow and Auntie, exactly. So I'm guessing this is the bad guy.
Not necessarily.
Correct. The person who is trying to thwart the main character's plan or scheme or whatever.
Yes, and they could be thwarting the hero who's the bad guy, or the hero could be the good guy, and they're just trying to keep them from doing something terrible.
Awesome. All right. Well, so far so good. What's next? Where's my outline?
Well, we have here in the outline a little discussion about not having too many characters. Why shouldn't we have too many characters? And when do we break that rule?
Oh, I know. It can be so confusing. I just read a very popular book, which I don't want to say the name of because I don't want it to feel like an endorsement, but there were so many characters and I was like having a really hard time keeping track of who was who. And that's basically, I think, the risk that you run. But I do think that you break that rule in something like mystery. Like, so Perot mystery will have a whole bunch of suspects. And so there might be like 8 or 9 characters that he's trying to suss out who was the bad guy. And so maybe then it's okay because your audience is coming into it looking for a big passel of possible problem people.
Nice try. That was a good effort.
Perpetrators.
Good job.
Perpetrators.
Good job.
Because you got to gather them all in one room at the very end and like go through why you thought each person was a suspect and then why you ruled them out before you get to the person who did it.
A plethora of possible. Sorry. Anyway,
You're gonna be coming up with these all show. So the important thing is that you need to make sure that your reader is not confused.
Yes,
yeah,
that's important.
And here's a clue: if you're getting confused, so is your reader. So if you're typing along in chapter 3, now was it the sister-in-law's cousin who did blah blah blah, or was it then? That's a big clue right there that you're getting confused. And another thing is you don't want to give your characters. I know this is kind of way out there, but you don't want to give them the same first letter sound of their name because that also becomes very confusing for the reader. Just on a note about character.
Right. And did we mention epics? I think that's another one where you get a lot of characters, like Lord of the Rings type adventures.
Yeah.
Where you have a lot of people working together on.
Yeah. And it's mandatory that you list them and their affiliation out in excruciating detail and pain. I think as a gauntlet that fantasy writers make their readers go through. Only the worthy can read this book. You must make it through this beginning introduction of 800 dwarves and elves and ogres. Anyway, sorry, I digress.
Okay, one of our chatters is chiming in, and Barb says, my opinion, the protagonist is the one whose arc is impacted the most.
Ooh, character arc.
Good segue.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Well, we have character arc on our list of elements. Maybe we should talk about that next, even though we had setting. I think people kind of understand setting.
Right. The setting is just your world, whatever world it happens to be.
So then we have story arc and character arc.
Right.
So
and I think we should talk about the difference.
Right. Well, I think there's a big clue there when you say story arc versus character. Well, sometimes in literary fiction, the character arc is the story arc, isn't it? And that's why literary fiction is a little bit inaccessible to some people because people who are craving a story are going to really miss that progression of things happening that move time forward. So that would be like the story arc. Like if you picture it, the momentum of your story is going up a hill. And then as you get to the conclusion, it's going down a hill. And that's why they're calling it an arc, right? So the story arc is the movement of the timeline of your novel and the things that happen along that timeline.
Right. And I just have to say that I always love it when Barb chimes in because I always learn something from her.
Yeah, she's great.
Like a fount of wisdom.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Rhonda, no laughing.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I think so too.
Your head, Rhonda.
For those who don't know, Barb is Rhonda's mommy, so she is chortling at the ideal of her mummy being a sage fount of wisdom. So,
well, the older you get, the more smart your mom gets.
That is a fact.
Yeah.
So the story arc is usually propelled or determined by the character arc. What's that one thing that the main character wants that they're going for? So the character arc and the story arc are very intertwined with one another. Wouldn't you say?
Yes. I would say, but you said something really interesting. You said, what is the one thing that your protagonist wants? And this has always kind of tripped me up as someone who doesn't really write fantasy. It's really easy to write a story. If someone tells you write a story where somebody really wants something, the quest for a ring, the quest for the secrets of the universe, the quest to find the meaning of life, that's all pretty clear to me. But I have a hard time when you're just writing like about people doing stuff. Well, what do they want? You know, to go get a pizza? Well, then they go get a pizza. Like the concept to me is so abstract. Can you maybe help me?
I think when you come up with a story idea, you already know what the character wants. Because if you're just talking about someone going to have pizza, you're just really telling a fact. It's not really a story until there's an arc involved. Now, if your character wanted to go get pizza because she had a crush on the boy behind the counter making the pizza, then her goal is to get his attention or to see him or whatever. So I think when you have a story idea, the goal is already what you're thinking of.
So that's great. So in our hypothetical scenario, could the antagonist maybe not be a person? Could it be like, I don't know, flat tire on the bicycle or...
Yeah, absolutely.
What about the person's inner voice, or maybe it's the echo of their mother's voice from the past telling her that pizza is going to make her fat
Yeah.
and that she shouldn't eat it.
Or pizza boys don't make enough money.
Ooh. That's really interesting because here's the thing. I think as a young writer, I was presented with like this kind of a list. And because I was unable to identify these elements in my own stories, they felt invalidated to me. But to be able to look at a protagonist and an antagonist in a different way, it's really helpful. So I appreciate you guys kind of walking through that with me.
No problem. And I hope that helps our listeners. And if you have any questions, pop them in the chat or pop us an email or something, because we'd be happy to do that for you. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what else can we say about story arc?
Well, if you want to talk about mysteries, Barb is spouting more wisdom. This in a mystery, the story arc is murder versus character arc is the main character story.
Story arc is the murder. Oh. So a mystery is going to be a whole different animal because the murder itself is sort of functions as a character is what it sounds like she's saying.
Well, it's the murder versus the character.
Oh, yeah. Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, that is because I guess I would naturally want to say that it would be the murderer versus the protagonist. Right. Yeah. The antagonist would be the murderer and the protagonist would be the person trying to solve the murder. But that's just really simplified, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Because the person doesn't know who the murderer is throughout the whole course of the book. And unless you're getting into like a weird Sherlock Holmes Moriarty thing, the murderer is not against the person trying to solve the crime necessarily. They're just kind of trying to lay low and hide. So there's no active like interference mostly. I mean, there is, I think that's why murder mystery writers end up going there because it makes for an interesting storyline to have one antagonist just poking at the crime solver, but usually it is the crime solver versus the murderer. That's really good.
Awesome. Okay, what else?
All right, about story arc?
Yeah.
Well, you need an antagonist. A lot of people don't like to make their bad guy be very bad. And a lot of the times it's because, well, we're Christians and we don't even really want people to know that we can even think of a bad scenario, much less be capable of acting one out. And so the antagonist is kind of weak. And the problem with that is then there's no tension and nobody cares what happens in your story because there's nothing at risk and there's nothing to be gained by overcoming. So, I'm not saying that you have to visit the most vile recesses of the human imagination, but you can't have an antagonist that is, not doing anything antagonistic.
Yeah. One thing I've always had a problem with is that All of my characters are darlings. And I just want everybody in real life and in my stories to just get along and be happy. So
Aw.
I've never been able to write a really terrible character or have something bad happen to my main character either. And I'm getting over that quickly and I'm starting to enjoy that. But that was a real problem for me for a long time.
And I found if it's because I'm marketing what I write to a Christian audience, like at one point I wanted my antagonist to rape a girl. And I really struggled to write that scene to the point where I cut it, because how do you go and have an evil person do something that evil and put it in the story without offending the sensibilities of someone who doesn't want to necessarily read that?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, it's how much detail do you go into?
Mhm.
And I was struggling with it, so I just decided to cut it from the story. But maybe in the future, it's something I would want to really think about and maybe even put in there without going into that detail, or,
Right.
you know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying. Like bad things happen in the human experience.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so you can't pretend that rape is not a thing. You can
Right.
handle the subject delicately or whatever. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's really interesting to think
We
about.
have a very special person in the chat who made a comment. So, Jennifer, hi, Jen. We missed you.
Florence.
Yeah.
She loves making bad guys really bad.
Yeah,
She
and
does.
Rhonda, you love to hate bad characters so much. It
I know.
surprises me that you don't like to write them. Write that character that's going to make your reader love to hate them.
I know. It's an aggression outlet for me to read
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, that's great.
But Tina, what you're saying though, I think it would depend on the degree of graphic
Yeah.
level that you went to. I know myself, I don't like reading. I mean, I understand that sort of stuff can happen and it can be useful in a book to tell a story like that. But in particular, there was a local author up north that I picked up her book, and she started it with some really graphic violence. And it made me so angry. I couldn't even get past the first like 6 pages because it was just so unnecessary. And I knew the book was going to be a thriller, but this was like beyond. And I don't know. I think your reader needs to be aware of what the graphic nature of all the scenes could be.
Right. And it comes into conflict with the advice of show, don't tell. So if your antagonist is going to rape somebody and you're supposed to show that and not tell it, no. In a Christian book, you have to tell it because you can't show it. So that's just a conundrum that you have
But
to
you
deal
can
with.
show motivation, you can show fear, you can show tension, you can show
And
you
the
can,
aftermath.
and you
can
can
show
still,
the aftermath.
you can still make something very real without telling everything, just in the way that you can, for the most part, avoid most swears. I think it's possible,
You can make up your own. Okay, so where were we?
I don't know. Where's my outline? Here it is.
So what do you mean? What do you mean by a flat character?
Oh, we have no one likes flat characters. What does this mean? Ooh. Well, my Moxie books that I'm currently writing. Okay, Rhonda, your whole ideal of everybody is happy, everybody is peaceful, everybody is living. Well, in order for that to happen, wouldn't everybody have to be sort of like a Stepford wife kind of a person? And if you're not familiar with that term, it's just more or less like a person with no depth. And that's what we mean about flat, isn't it? So if you're happy all the time, you probably aren't thinking very deeply. And so if your character is happy and always good things happening and everything like that, then the character is going to read what we call flat, because there's not any depth of character, depth of emotion, problems to solve, depth of thought.
Right. And even in real life, there is not one person walking on this planet that is 100% good. And there's not one person walking on this planet that is 100% evil. You're going to find good and bad in everybody. I don't tell my family because they don't know this, but I have flaws. And everybody does.
Well, I don't.
And even those that are horribly flawed have some redeeming quality.
Well, and that's what we talk about when we picked our group name, we don't pretend to be perfect.
Right.
And anyway, if we were, I mean, it'd be kind of dull, you would think.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, isn't this like a big trope? Like the whole, like the Titanic. So she was living with all of this money and supposedly everything was wonderful, but she was living a flat existence because in that world, nobody showed emotion. Nobody ever had an outburst. Nobody ever acted without decorum, and it was flat and boring, right? And so,
just like that board that she floated off on all by
with room
herself.
for two people.
Yeah.
Oh man, do we need a spoiler alert on the beginning of this episode?
For
Because
somebody who hasn't seen the Titanic.
yeah, because I went to a Christmas Eve service with my sister the year that it came out, and the pastor, he said the ending, and I was in a rage saying he gave away the ending of the Titanic, and somebody's like, that the boat sank. Like they totally were like, how did you not know that was the ending?
I was so off track with what you were saying. I was thinking, what do you mean Christmas started 2,000 years ago? What do you mean the year it came out?
Not the year Christmas came out, Tina.
The baby was born. Spoiler. Okay. So we have some comments in the chat.
I bet.
Jennifer is saying,
get back on topic. Oh.
You can focus on detail. In avoiding Esther, the sound of the belt buckle is pretty powerful.
Right. So I remember she talked all about the events leading up to, which we knew what was going to happen, right?
Right. And Barb B says, show emotions, tell about graphic actions.
Great advice.
Yes, very good. So we have moved into character arc. We didn't really announce it. But when we started talking about flat characters, that's what we've moved into. And so your character has to go on some kind of developmental journey, whether that's emotional, spiritual, physical, mental. Most protagonists start in one place and end in another place, and there's a change, and that change is what we call the arc. Of course, there are some stories where the character doesn't change, but the world around them changes. And I would say that those are like superhero stories. Although some of them don't follow that, because like Superman had a character arc.
Yeah, I mean, my brain, I am not a superhero kind of a person, much to the chagrin of many people who I know who are like talking Team Marvel and Team DC. And I'm just like, I don't know. I like the new Spider-Man guy. He's cute and funny and whatever, but I don't know. Yeah, he's a little cutie pie. Have you guys seen him? He's really nice. Anyway, such a nice young man. That's how I feel, like a grandma pinching his cheek. But anyway, I digress. But like the Iron Man guy had a character arc. Like even the bad guy who looked like a big giant rock had a character arc. Like, I mean, I really cannot think of a successful character who over time did not in some way change, right? Like, so even like Dirty Harry, because he interacted with whatever widow, whoever, like they all, you notice if you're paying attention, changes in this or that way about them. Right. I don't think that a person can live life without changing, correct?
Yeah, you're right. And I think the newer versions of these superheroes, those character arcs, I don't believe it really existed in the original comics that they originally wrote. I think it was the world around the heroes that changed.
Yeah, and I think it was mostly because they were primarily focused on action and crime caper kind of things. And
But
so all
then,
of this emotion and everything is an invention of modern writers.
yeah, and Hollywood's trying to sell good movies, and so they're adding. I mean, they're really exploring the characters of these superheroes, and I think it's kind of cool.
But then I don't know. I bet you if we had any really super heavy duty comic book fans in here, they would be like ripping us up and down because I bet you if you read all that tiny little print that was like printed in the box besides the pows and the zings, there was like, a girl who they've been pursuing comic after comic, or an evil antagonist that was really in the background of your mind. But we only got like this much every week.
Mhm.
So if we weren't following it, I was never following it. It never seemed that it always seemed like the same old Dick Tracy solving the same old whatever. You know what I mean?
And if there
Anyway.
was a character arc, it was elongated over the
Long.
course of multiple stories,
Yeah.
and not just the one story that was being told.
Those old school fans were pretty dedicated, weren't they? I mean, to like stick with something like that. And
Yeah. Well, and that's part of the thing that keeps you coming back. I think, like in series that I watch, it's not so much the whatever's going to happen each episode, but watching those characters over
Interact,
time,
yeah.
over whatever 18 seasons or whatever it is that you're watching.
Well, I think you made a really strong case for a character arc.
And Barb B says Miss Marple never changed.
She didn't have to.
Yeah, she was
Her
perfect.
her character arc was before we met her.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so what about looks like we're running out of time. Do we want to talk about our personal hangups? Or do we just want to move on to our sharing of our feeding of the backs?
Well, it's getting pretty late.
Yeah, we'll move on.
Okay. If we didn't talk so much, maybe could have got. And we have more. And when I did the outline for next time, that might actually be 2 episodes. We're gonna have a meeting about it because there was a lot of stuff. So, and I think that we could talk about this all month, and it would be great Preptober fodder.
Yeah, and I really would love it if anybody who's watching this would reach out and let us know what they need to hear, or if they have questions, so that we can make sure we're giving content that feeds people.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's move on to the feeding of the backs. This is a cute little term that we came up with because we give each other feedback on our writing, hence the feeding of the backs. And since this is a sprint that is unedited and unpolished and unplanned, we do not give negative feedback. We only give positive feedback. So, who wants to go first?
Not it. So it's
I will, I suppose. All right. Not a complete story, but you get what you get. Okay.
You'll have to tell us what the words are so that everyone knows.
All right. The words, and I got all but one of them. Retain, restless, gap, middle, and strong. And Tina,
Not bad.
Thank you for a couple sentences, Tina.
Yeah.
Okay. Ready? I'm trying to retain my memories and telling them. Let me start over. I'm trying to retain my memories, and telling them to you helps me, Grandma said, sounding half exasperated, but the bigger half was teasing. She knows she's told me these stories many times before. I listen every time, though, because the stories have matured with me. As a little girl, she told me just the basic facts with a little flavor. As I got older, the details became juicier and really flavorful. It's still the same stories, but the real truth comes out a little more each time. Every once in a while, she lets a new story leak in. You know, I used to watch The Young and the Restless way back when, leaning forward in her rocker. She started off one of these new ones. Well, they never had a storyline as good as what you're going to hear now. She sat back, slowly rocking, never taking her eyes off of me. She loved reactions. I love the sound of the dueling creaks, a little bass from the strong oak rocker, a little treble from the gap in the floorboard, occasionally a little harmony from her bad knee. When did you have time to watch soap operas, Grandma? Oh, you know, when I first hired into the plant, I was constantly laid off. Oil embargo, you know. She mindlessly picked up the knitting in her lap and began stitching. How she could knit without looking was beyond me. I would never have had time to make all those cute little outfits for you if I'd been working. She eyed the outfit I was wearing now. I came here straight from the gym, and I was still wearing my spandex walking pants. Remember that day glow polyester I used to dress you in? She chuckled. They couldn't make it bright enough for me. She tugged at the material on my knee. This polyester doesn't feel the same. I can't believe people are wearing it again. The end.
Why is it the end?
Oh, you'll see this one again sometime.
The whole music thing that you did was brilliant.
Oh,
really nice
Definitely.
there. That's really
Yeah.
good. And
thanks.
I think it's interesting how you were talking about the juicy details of a story, and you were kind of talking about it as food. And I was just kind of trying to tell my kids how you can devour a book. And not to be too deep or anything, but Tina, remember we were talking about like the heavenly banquet feast or whatever?
Mhm.
What if it's just learning more and more and just getting more and more knowledge from Christ, and that's kind of like the feast. Anyway, whatever. But that was a Havrim that Tina and I were having.
Okay, so now we're gonna have to explain that word.
Yeah,
well,
because I have no idea what that is.
it basically means hemming and hawing if you take it literally, but we were just talking about like things of the, the coming of the Lord and all of that. It was like really cool.
Oh,
Instead of working one day, we were supposed to be having
Yeah.
office hours, but we totally had church instead. I don't know why.
Yeah, it was like 4 hours long. It was
Yeah.
awesome.
Anyway, but
Yeah, Havarim is a Jewish word. It's a Hebrew
Oh.
word that means friends who hem and haw, and basically about scripture. So they have debates and discussions about scripture. So
but in my defense, I did work after. But we'll talk about that in Accountability Corner, right?
right.
Anyway, that was really amazing, Rhonda. And
Oh, thank you.
I know you always kind of complain that you don't get much out, but you
Mhm.
really do squeeze out and craft some beautiful words. I hope that you know
Oh,
that
thank you. I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
definitely quality over quantity.
for sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, your
Appreciate it.
characters are always so awesome. I love your characters. They feel so real.
They do. They really do. It's like you feel like you know this person.
Yeah.
I never really did know anybody like that grandmother, but I feel like I did. She was real. Very good.
Good.
Yeah.
All
Okay,
right.
should I go next or are you going to go next?
I'll
Jane?
go next. Quality over quantity. I guess I got quantity. No, just kidding. What is this? This is 382. 382. And I think I got all the words. Not sure. There is a picture of me that I like to look at. It reminds me of a simpler time in my life. I'm wearing high-waisted, peg-legged, acid-wash jeans and a new shaker sweater from the Gap. As usual, I'm standing in the middle of my two sisters and have my arms draped across their shoulders. Over the decades, as I became restless and decided to become a different incarnation of myself, I've allowed objects to slip from my grasp and no longer be my possessions. But this photo and its associated rituals, the smile and the thought of, why, that's that old photo, the head shaking at the fashion of the day and her sky-high 80s hairdos, the sharing of the picture with whatever young person happens to be in my orbit in that season of my life, and the 3 taps on the unrecognizable women and the description of how they are important to said youngster has been the one thing that I have chosen to retain. The real me is in that photograph. Though I am always happy to see her, I almost always cry when I do. I wish I could hug her, reassure her, warn her. It's not so much that I am unhappy with who I have become. It is rather that I am melancholy about the death of who I once was. I am not as strong as I used to be, so now my daughter is the one who shares the picture with me. She means well, but places it too close to my nose, and the entire thing is nothing but a swirl of blues and whites and the pink of the polarized candy apple red Mustang we are all leaning against. There is the thought, why, it's that same old photo. There is the shake of the head, and my well-intentioned son-in-law adjusts my pillow, raises the bed. The picture is placed in my hand. From my lap now, the 3 girls smile up at me. There is no longer any young person in my orbit. There is no more tapping and naming to be done. I smile anyway, and a single tear falls and lands on the face of the girl I used to be.
Oh.
Is that the end?
Yep.
Oh, my word. What a heart ripper.
That was so good. I don't even
It
know what to
was.
say about it. Like,
That was a
'Cause-
roller coaster.
having been a teenager in the 80s, it really, like, I remember the big hair and all that stuff. It just really was
Yeah.
very personal.
That was so real to me. I could smell the Liz Claiborne.
If I knew what Liz Claiborne was, I probably could smell it too.
Oh,
It's the-
every girl in my town wore Liz Claiborne.
It's the smell of earthworms. Do you know why it's the smell of earthworms?
Why?
Because I sat next to a girl in school, and that was the cologne that she wore, and we had to dissect an earthworm, and she was my partner. So every time I smell that smell, I think of earthworms. I didn't smell the ether or whatever it was, the stuff that makes them die. I smelled Liz Claiborne, so that is earthworm smell to me.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my word.
Well, I was a
so
teenager
great,
in
though.
Alaska. I'm not sure we had Liz Claiborne in Alaska.
No, maybe not.
Maybe.
Probably had the earthworms, though.
It was I Loves Baby Soft or something.
Oh,
like
yeah.
that.
Oh, that's a nice fragrance, actually.
It is.
Okay.
Wow, Jamie, that was so good.
I'm
And
glad
it's,
you
I mean, I
liked it.
think so many people can relate to that, too.
I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah.
It feels complete, too. Like, it makes me really happy that I have a beginning, a middle, and an end, I feel like.
Yep.
So tired of everything I have flapping in the breeze.
Well, it is only a 15-minute sprint.
That's true.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what did you come up with in 15 minutes, Bambina?
Well, I don't think I used any of the words because I completely ignored them.
Yes.
Oh.
She has been given permission to ignore them because she
She gave me 2
grumbles.
sentences.
Yes, and she's trying to write about dystopian Alaska, so it's kind of hard sometimes to fit in words like.
Yeah, then I don't think they built the gap into the middle of. Anyway, I'm a little nervous about reading this because Jennifer's listening, and this is probably the closest to romance I'll probably ever get. So
Oh.
that's just a little spoiler there. Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
Yep.
As Angelica's feet flew over the ground, thoughts of Petra flooded her mind, and tears coursed down her cheeks. She could see him as a young man running ahead of her through the trees, his hair flying out behind him, and as he turned to call back to her, "Come on, Angelica, catch up. My grandma can run faster than you." Then he'd take off again, and she would push herself to catch up until they'd both collapse in the clearing at the top of the ridge, lungs burning and ribs aching as they laughed. The last time they ever raced to the ridge, Petra had rolled onto his side, his elbow in the dirt and his head on his hand, looking down on her. Something about the way he was looking at her made Angelica's insides feel like boiling water. He'd reached over and moved a strand of hair from her eyes, and the next thing she knew, his lips were pressed to hers. He drew back, staring down at her with a look that said he was as shocked as she was about what had just happened. "I'm sorry," he stuttered. She knew what he wasn't saying. Their fathers had an agreement that when they came of age, Angelica and Donovan would be married. For Petra to kiss her, or even have feelings for her, was like a betrayal. To return those feelings would be a betrayal on her part. But Angelica hadn't cared. She'd already done the unforgivable. Why should she worry about something so small as a kiss? She put her hand on the back of Petra's head. I just lost my spot. Sorry.
Oh, come on.
And kissed him back, pouring out all the feelings her soul contained into it. And he'd responded in kind. Right up until the moment he jumped up and stood looking down on her. A look on his face she couldn't read. Her heart began to pound even faster. "Petra? I can't," he said, and then he was gone, running into the trees in the direction of home. That was the last time they'd run together through the forest before collapsing together, exhausted on the top of the ridge. There were no more long talks revealing the depths of their hearts to one another, no more working side by side to accomplish some harebrained scheme. Angelica collapsed to her knees as the sobs shook her body. When she looked up, she realized she was on the lake shore, and directly in front of her, bobbing on the waves, was a canoe.
I think Jennifer will approve.
I think so also.
Mm-hmm. Did you lose your place on purpose?
No, I had to scroll.
Oh.
I had to scroll because I couldn't see the rest.
I'm just glad that
And
it
when I
wasn't
did, I couldn't find
3,
it.
2, 1.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, right. See, I never have to scroll because mine's always
Wow.
I was like 420. That's how many words I had.
Is it?
Wow.
It's, I mean, we're talking about when someone loses a loved ones, there's just not words. Like sometimes there's just not words for just like, that was an experience that you took us through. And I keep saying over and again, like, this is amazing writing and totally am not surprised. You're a very good writer, and to be able to do that is really a gift. So really, really nicely done.
Yeah. You haven't written much romance, right?
No.
Do you think that since you know these characters as well as you do, that it was easier to put them together like that in a romance scene?
No. I don't know.
Well, it's okay. So we joke and we say, I don't usually write romance, but that's different than writing relationships between characters. Writing a romance is a genre. Writing a romance means a happily ever after and all the things that it means to write a romance. But you can write character and you can write interactions between character. And if they happen to be romantic interactions, then that's just what they are. So you don't ever have to be afraid to write something romantic because you don't write romance. It's obviously very possible, as Tina just demonstrated.
Right. And I've experienced the one that got away when I was young. And, you know, all those feelings and all the pain and the tears and all that. You know, I was 17. So I can connect with that internally and bring it out on the page.
Yeah, so I happen to know what happened just before all of this because I've been sometimes working with Tina and not just talking about the Bible. I have heard her daily kind of sprints that she does. And so knowing, you all need to read this book because I know what she is running from and what had just happened. It's like huge. So it's even like for me. So I highly recommend buying Tina's book as soon as she publishes it to everybody out there.
Yes, 5 years from now.
No. I think that's a good segue, though, into Accountability Corner. Sorry, I know I'm not the host, but I mean, since we're talking about it.
Right. Well, you know, sometimes I got to be brought back into line.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you go first? Tell us how it's going with all of that. Really? Do you think 5 years, or how are you really doing?
No. That was a joke. I am right. This point where she comes to the lake is like the beginning of my third act. If I was to break my book into 3 acts, so my revision portion is I'm starting the third act, and this is where the action picks up. And things start to move faster, and I'm out of the murky middle. So I'm really hopeful that I can get this done by the end of the year.
Yay! Because the murky middle is a terrible place to live.
Yeah.
And I wrote it so long ago, and I was reading it and going, ugh, and then rewriting it. So I really just kind of revised, but rewrote the entire middle of my book.
Wow.
But
Good
I think it's much better for it. So
awesome. All right. Well, do you want to set goals for next week or what? How can we hold you accountable?
I mean, I just need to get my butt in the chair and during office hours and do the work.
Yes, and we need to expect work from each other. Like yesterday, I couldn't be in the chat room. So Tina's like, is anybody doing office hours? I'm like, I'm going to be working. I expect you to be working.
And I had every intention of working, but then my son Michael showed up. He lives a couple hours north of us in Caseville, Michigan, which is on the tip of the thumb, and I don't see him that much. So it was really nice to visit with him, and then I had other stuff I had to do by the time he left. So,
but you did do some work.
I did. I wrote a sentence.
No, I'm saying over the past week.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's been a successful. But so you're not doing NaNoWriMo, right?
Well, I signed up for it, but I may not be having the same goal that everyone else does. I think I'm going to use it for getting my book done.
So your goal is to try to be done by the end of November, right?
Yes, and if I participate in NaNoWriMo and make my goal editing 50,000 words, that's longer than what my book was, what's left in my book. So
terrific.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to go next, Rhonda?
Why don't you go next?
I'm frustrated with you, but we'll get to that.
Okay.
So I'm really happy with the work that I did over this past week, and I am just such an odd cat that I find that my desire to actually do the work is really haphazard and random. And I've just decided to be okay with that, because when I just allow myself to be the weirdo that I am never unhappy with my amount of productivity. It's when I start to expect of myself, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and I'm going to work from this hour to this hour, that I then have a measure to be disappointed with what I've done, which then makes me feel like I'm a failure. And so then it's like perpetuating further failure. So I'm just going to embrace the fact that I may not always work from office hour time to office hour time, but I have to get back to at least doing a writing sprint at the beginning, so that I can feel better about waiting around until I'm feeling inspired to do the other work, because I just feel too guilty. So whatever. But I'm really happy with all that I accomplished. I feel like, okay, I've done this fun thing. I've decided that all of my chapters, instead of having names, are going to have a quote pulled from that chapter. So like, for example, "You've done it again!" exclamation point is the name of the chapter. And I've been having a lot of fun, like picking the quote to be the title of the chapter. And it's been a really fun time. And every chapter that I have of the book has a title, which means I've actually like read it. It's staying and it's permanent enough to have a name. And I have a beginning and a middle and an end. I'm so excited. I just have to put in some more, like red herring type stuff, because right now the mystery is just solved way too easily and too directly. And I want to thank you, Rhonda, because some of the feedback you've given me has given me some ideas of how I can like expand the story and make it a better read for my audience. So anyway, I'm really super happy with the trajectory that I'm on, and I want to be able to come back with the same report next week.
Awesome.
So Rhonda, before you left on your trip, you had news about your publication, and then you were gone on your trip, and you've managed to avoid telling us what is going on. So I'm so happy that you are participating in Accountability Corner.
Wait. What's happening? My headphones. All right. So I'll tell you that when I was wrapping everything up on my trip, so the last Accountability Corner that I could not finish, no, the book was not published yet, even though I intended. I'd worked so hard on doing that. And so on the trip, I worked on it, and it is pretty much, I need to look over it one more time before I put it in the program and actually have it printed. But yeah, it's pretty much done.
Yay!
So excited for you.
Thank you. I am thrilled beyond belief, because what I've learned from this one is the next one I do, I've already got all the information I need for it. And it should only be, I'm going to say maybe 2 months before, I'm going to say before the end of the year, which is pretty much 2 months. I can have that one done, because I know all the mistakes I've made in this one and all the decisions I had to make, they're made already. So
it's sort of automatizing and streamlining the process for you.
Yes. Yep.
Mm-hmm. So it's plugging in this information as opposed to this information. So is your goal for next week to write a character that does something really terrible and horrible, or write one of your pet characters have something terrible and horrible befall them? Yes.
That is my goal for next week. I'm going to write something just really evil.
Yeah. Why not? Yeah, because remember we did that exercise in that other writing group we were in about the misunderstood witch from Hansel and Gretel.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so you didn't even have to, like, I'm really trying to think of you making anybody really kind of mean, you know?
I know. She had a reason.
Mm-hmm. It's awesome. Well,
I
good
can't
job.
wait to read that, because if she can write these nice characters to feel like people you know, I'm going to be trying to figure out who this evil person is.
Right?
I'm going to be like... Anyway, that's going to be fun and juicy and all that stuff.
I think I would really enjoy that right now, actually.
All right. Okay.
We've had a little bit of activity in the chat. Can I read that?
Yes, please.
Sure.
Well, Barb asks, when did she become my grandmother? Well,
did I say grandmother?
No.
Oh.
No, Barb asked, because remember when I was writing that, I said, well, I had mom written down here, but I'm changing it all to grandma. So yes, that is you, Mom. Okay. Jennifer says, Jamie, she did not need a cry right now.
Oh,
And that was such a great story. And she says, Tina, that was amazing. You get a wholehearted shout of approval from this romance writer.
oh,
Oh, good.
yay!
I'm glad you
Gigi
liked it.
Wagner, yeah, says that you ladies are so talented. Loved each one of them. Amazed how 3 totally different stories came from the same group of words, except Tina's.
Oh, mine wasn't good.
No, it was good.
I know what she meant. Sorry,
Well-
that's my sarcastic sense of humor coming out again.
So we want our audience to also set a timer for 15 minutes and see what they come up with. I mean, this is
Yeah.
art. This is God made us all different and unique, and it's really fun to see exactly that, what you come up with your 15 minutes. It's really fun for us. So please tag us if you share something like that on social media.
Yeah, and I'm teaching a class in our homeschool co-op to some teenagers on how to write a book. And we start each class with a sprint. It's a 10-minute sprint because I only have 50 minutes with them. But and so I started a Google Classroom for them to post their sprints because we don't have time to read them in class. And so it's like we're like 4 weeks in, or four co-ops into the year, and they finally started posting their sprints. And it's so cool to read how differently each of them come up with what they're going to do with the same words. It's really, I'm loving being the whole teacher thing, and I get to go in there and comment and give them 100% for participation.
I love it that you're doing this with them.
Yeah,
I really
good
do.
for
It's such
you.
a great exercise. I think that Monday you should give us their words.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Anyways, does anyone else have anything else to say, or are we good to sign off?
Is that it from the chat? Or because I know I totally jumped in there.
Oh, let's see. Well,
Barb doesn't feel inspired to do the dishes. Let's see what she's saying. Jamie. But I have to do them to reach my goal. Clean sort of house. So daily writing needs to be done to reach the goal of publication. And she's preaching to herself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my husband would say that every week when he did a sermon, that he was really preaching to himself.
I think that as someone who's written daily for a really long time, I've just noticed it's more of a noticing thing, and I don't feel like it's a letting myself off the hook thing, because I would be very sad if I allow myself to write when I want to, if when I wanted to was the same when I want to as it was before I was writing daily. Because now, in other words, I'm saying rigidly adhering to a principle for the sake of rigidly adhering to the principle may not get you as good of results as knowing who you are and paying attention to what works. Because like I said, I was never unhappy with my productivity. I published 3 books, and I was never unhappy with my productivity before office hours. You know what I'm saying? And so, but I know that about myself. But if everybody else knows about themselves, that if they don't tell themselves from 9 to 11 is when I work, they'll never get it done, then that's what they have to do. But it's a level of being honest with yourself. And that's why also I like the accountability of having to come here and report whether or not I've been successful. Accountability is very important.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so this concludes the Christian Indie Writers Podcast. So until next week, may your pen be prolific, your deadlines be met, and may all of your words honor Christ.
Bye.
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 Okay, end broadcast.